Hi, I'm Kalila Harris, and for the purposes of this session, I am the chairperson of the Connection Committee for Psi Phi Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, serving East Baltimore. As the Connection Chair, I'm responsible for our community engagement and social action. This is the fifth in a series of interviews with candidates for City Council President based on data collected as part of the Blueprint for Baltimore City. OSI Baltimore and community partners Baltimore Votes, Black Girls Vote, Black Leaders Organizing for Change, CASA, and the No Boundaries Coalition conducted the canvass and survey in the fall, asking more than 5,000 Baltimore residents to identify their priorities for city leadership, making this the largest issue-oriented survey in Baltimore's history. You can see their survey results at osibaltimore.org/blueprint. OSI co-sponsors Alpha Kappa Alpha's Psi Phi Omega chapter and the Junior League of Baltimore, along with media sponsors WYPR and the Real News Network, plan to host a forum a week and a half ago to pose these questions to City Council President candidates. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the forum was canceled. Instead, we will conduct these interviews with each of the candidates individually using questions prepared for the forum. Lisa Snowden-McCrae of the Real News Network, YPR's Tom Hall, and I were scheduled to moderate the forum. Unfortunately, Tom and Lisa are not available to participate in this interview, so I will ask their questions for them. Today, we're talking to Carl Stokes. Welcome, Carl.
Hi, Kalila. How are you today?
I cannot complain. I'm here and I'm breathing.
Great.
We'll ask questions related to 6 areas covered in the Blueprint survey: education
Okay.
and youth support, public safety and policing, housing, economic and community development, health, and civic participation. We'll ask you to please limit your responses to around 90 seconds.
Okay.
Before we start on the questions, can you let us know how you're dealing with COVID-19 and any reflections you have on the city's response to the pandemic?
Okay. Well, I am actually doing fine given the tremendous impact of this. It is a very tough time for all of us, all of America, let alone the world right now. But I am doing fine. My family is well, thank God, and we're looking out for each other. In terms of the city, I think that the city is doing as well as it can. I feel that there are times when, everybody doesn't have to be a leader all of the time. And what I mean by that is that I think that the governor of the state, Hogan, is doing a really good job of being a leader. And I think that the mayor is doing a very good job of following the governor. So what I'm saying is, people ask me, how is the city doing in terms of leadership? I think they're doing a good job in following the governor. And I don't mean that I just think that that's a compliment to both the governor and to the mayor in terms of the job they're doing. You will notice I didn't mention the third level of government. I didn't say anything kind there, but so I'll stop.
Okay, all right. First up is going to be education and youth support. As you may know, I am also managing director for K-12 education policy at the Center for American Progress. So this issue is near and dear to my heart. Let's get started.
Okay.
City officials often state that they don't have a role in public education because they don't control Baltimore City public schools. Answering only yes or no, do you believe school board commissioners should be confirmed by City Council?
I think they should be, yes. And if I could just add a piece,
Sure.
I took care of the yes or no, but I also think that at least half of the Baltimore City School Board should be elected by the general public. I think that right now, what we have is a school board who are autonomous and answer to no one. No one. They don't answer to parents. They don't answer to students. They don't answer to elected officials. They don't answer to anyone. And I've gone to school board meetings where parents and children have come in and said, I'd like to present a case or talk to the school board. And the school board says, you got 2 minutes. And by the way, if you didn't sign up an hour and a half ago, you can't talk now either. And I've seen them be horribly rude to parents and to other teachers. Long story short, I think that at least half of that group should be elected and held accountable directly by the citizens of the city.
Great, thank you. What other specific ways does city government play a role in making sure Baltimore students have a quality education in every school?
Well, the city, since forever, has never given enough of its funding to Baltimore City schools. It gives now somewhere between 11 and 14% of its general operating budget to schools. Every other jurisdiction in the state of Maryland, except one other, gives about 35 to almost 60% of their operating budget to schools and to education, to young people. And that number is closer to the truth. So I think that if elected president of the city council, I would work very hard to, from this point on, raise by a percentage or two for the foreseeable future, maybe 30 more years, and hopefully less than that, but to every year raise the percentage of operating budget that goes to public education in Baltimore City. I think that's the biggest. I'm sorry. And then I think that we have to hold proper hearings. I think the attitude that we sometimes take with the police department, that we don't control schools or police, is nonsensical. Of course we do. Certainly if the schools were, batting the ball out of the ballpark, we'd all be standing up with our chests blown up and saying, yes, yes, these are our schools. Of course, we are responsible for the schools and the young people and the education that they get.
Great, thank you. The Blueprint for Baltimore overwhelmingly supports increased investments in our city's young people. Again, answering only yes or no, do you support the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund remaining outside of city government to preserve the vision of community members from across the city who work to gather and set it up?
Yes, I do. Should I say more?
Sure.
Okay. I absolutely support it. I think that the vision that came together, that so many folk from across the city who have never been involved in this process before or a similar process, here's what happens in our city. We have some really big, strong funders in our town. Good people, good organizations, but the people who do the real work have day jobs. They go to work every day in the city, and then at the end of that day, they come over to a rec center or to a church basement or to their own home, and they do more stuff for young people in this city. And they don't get paid for doing that. They don't get a dime for doing that. As a matter of fact, most of them go into their own pockets and spend their money to support our youth. Meanwhile, the big funders give their money to professionals, which is not a bad thing or good thing, not a judgment, but they're giving it to people whose job is to do this, whether they do it well or not, whether they're in sync with the people that they're working with or not. And again, the people who do this best are the people who are not getting paid, but they should be getting paid. They should be able to have a sustaining salary from this, and so that they don't have to spend 8 or 10 hours prior to getting there to do what they're doing well and doing it with their passion and with their heart. Long story short, sorry I'm past the 90 seconds, but I think it should stay outside of city government, and it should be informed by the people who are closest to the children.
Thank you. And last point on education, some argue that money the city spends on policing should actually be allocated to education and youth programming. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, public safety, probably the money we spend on public safety should at least go to police. It should go to schools. It should go to engagement of children. It should go to the arts and music for young people. It should go to trauma reduction and mental health services. It should go to family counseling. That's public safety for real. That's public safety. That other thing that we call policing is not really public safety. It doesn't prevent. It doesn't it doesn't get close to people in a way that engages them in a way so that they are more active socially and otherwise. So I remember it wasn't a few years ago, and I mentioned this because some of the folk who are running for president now were in the council, at least one of them were, and we moved $7 million out of, quote, the mayor's budget and put it into keeping recreation centers open longer hours, pools opening, etc. But it took a vote of the city council to move money in the mayor's budget. And at the end of the day, I think it takes 8 people to pass a motion in the council. But I think there were 9 people, including one of the opponents in this, who voted no to moving $7 million to keeping rec centers open later, to engaging music and art in those centers. And we lost that battle just for lack of voting of members of the city council, putting money where it worked best for young people. And we took it from the police department, by the way.
Right. So let's continue along this line around public safety.
Okay.
As the city council president, you're the chief legislative official in the city. What legislation can you suggest or imagine that would effectively address violence reduction?
Address what? I'm sorry.
Violence reduction.
Violence reduction. All right. Well, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit. I think that putting money into the schools in a way that works, that's meaningful. As you know, I ran 2 schools, both of whom successfully. We can get into the fighting of the city school system on another forum at another time. But both schools, the actually academic numbers, and no one disputes this, the system itself in court said we can't dispute their academic numbers. They're some of the best in the city. But our kids went to school from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and they not only did ABC and math, but they did music. Music was a part of the regular program. Art was a part of the regular program. Chess and debate and other activities were a part of their extended program. And we gave them breakfast, we gave them lunch, but we also gave them dinner every day. So 4 days out of 5, we gave them dinner. What I'm saying to you is that we must do more than have this cutout of 8 to 3 as in terms of our young people. They need so much more than that. And what we did in the schools, where we made sure that there was mental health all day long, on demand, for not only for the children, but for the family. So we had mental health for family as well as for the young men. At that time, our school was only for boys. And we also made sure that we had medical professionals for health, physical health, were also in the school every day, whether it was supplied in one instance by the school system, by Baltimore City, in another instance we privately funded, having a nurse and a doctor come in once a week. Again, not only for the health of the boys who were in school, but we made them available for family health also. So it's not all legislation. It's how you set up your schools and where you put the funding. And you can do this in partnership with other people. For example, we brought in social workers from the University of Maryland who worked with our school. They were interns, some of them, but we also brought in a licensed social worker who would oversee the interns who were part of the program. So some of its legislation, like making absolutely sure that you put in enough funds into the budget, that is legislatively done. But other of it is having a plan and having people who know exactly how to do such for young people to make it work.
Great, thank you. And I just want to be mindful of time so we can be sure to
I'm
get
sorry.
through these questions so the general
I
public can hear
understand.
from you.
Okay.
So the public safety questions were drafted by Tom Hall, I want to add. I'm just going to ask one more. 24% of the respondents to the Blueprint survey said they wanted to improve relationships between police and community. What's the role of the City Council President in this effort?
I think the effort is more trying to be liaison between the community and the police. I want to say that oftentimes we are asked about what we would do about public safety, et cetera, and crime, particularly. Now, crime is an executive branch. I'm not saying I have nothing to do with it, but part of the problem I find with some elected officials is they want to do everything. Legislators' role is not to run the executive branch of government, and they stick their nose in and they, try to tell the mayor how they should run the executive branch of government rather than having more of a advise and consent role. I say that to say this. I work very closely with the communities, and I think that communities need outlets and they need access to the police leadership, being able to have this conversation. The same thing with the schools. We have to make it easier and set up forums that would allow transparency between our police department and our citizens in the neighborhoods.
Great, thank you. So we're going to move on to some questions from Lisa Snowden McCrae in regards to public health.
Okay.
Respondents to the survey said that if more money were allocated to mental health, trauma, substance abuse services, the government should make treatment for these things more affordable. As
Mm-hmm.
City Council President, how would you advocate for that?
Yeah, I think not only more affordable for a certain population, um, free. It shouldn't cost anything for us to have trauma specialists in our schools daily, mental health in our schools daily, nurses, and when need be, doctors and dentists in our school daily. Most of our children are 85% of Baltimore City's public schools children are living in homes and they are eligible for reduced or free lunch. Given that, we should not have a long conversation about how much we are going to charge these families to get American health care. They should get it. I don't think we need to have a long conversation about what the cost is. The cost should be nothing available to these young people and their families.
How and where would you advocate for that?
I would advocate for it in the city budget that comes down every year. I'll get to that, I guess, a little bit later. But, there are tens of millions of dollars wasted in Baltimore City's government. We don't collect water bills from the richest and wealthiest of people who get water in the city. And we act like we don't care. In other words, if someone comes to us and says, I owe $2 million, I'd like to pay it. We say, we'll get to you, maybe. And then 2 years or 3 years or 4 years go by and we never get to them because we don't need it, I guess. And there's just a lot of corruption. There is corruption in city government. I know that, it's like the Casablanca. I know you're way too young for that, but it's like in Casablanca where the police chief says, "What? Gambling? I can't believe it." But here are your winnings, Captain. What? But anyway, the humor or non-humor aside, we're not very good in exposing the incompetency and corruption that is in Baltimore city government. Now, most of city government, most of the people who work in city government are honorable people and honest people, and they're hardworking people, and they come in every day and they do their job and they're responsible. But there is a layer of folk who are not honorable, and they're not good people, and they steal from the citizens of the city, and or they're incompetent, and they don't do the best job for the citizens of this city. Not collecting tens of millions of dollars of water bills is incompetent. And I haven't read the books myself, so I don't know if it's corruption, but I know it's incompetency. And I know that there is plenty of money in our city government books that we're not discovering and are not bringing forth.
Thank you.
Yes.
So 30% of respondents citywide said that it's important to them that they have access to affordable, healthy food. Do you have a plan that shows that you're addressing the issue of food deserts? And if so, what is it? Excuse me.
Well, I'm not going to answer every question as if I have every answer. I don't have a plan as we talk right now for addressing that. I know that we absolutely need to make sure that people have access to food. And some of it may require or inspire us to set up more farmer markets. We may not get a full 50,000 square foot or larger supermarket in every neighborhood. We may not do that because the economics of it may not work for the developer, may not work for the business person. And so it'd be untruthful to say that we're going to do such a thing when we don't have the means to do it. Baltimore City is not going to run 20 supermarkets, but there are plenty of farmers in Maryland and around Maryland, and I've been to numerous farmers markets, and they are portable, so to speak. In other words, we have this great tradition in Baltimore, where we put produce on a cart and a horse draws it and brings it. Now, whether you like it or you don't like it, I'm saying that we can use a truck. But we can, and I've seen it before. I've seen it many times at, for example, St. Francis Academy, which I'm familiar with in East Baltimore. They used to bring farmers up from the South and also from parts of Maryland. And on Saturdays, they would have this great big farmers market of fresh produce and some poultry there. And of course, people come and they shop for a week, 2 weeks until the next time that they have a farmer's market. So that would be one idea that we could explore in trying to be able to be sure that we are able to bring produce and fresh food into communities that currently do not have them.
Okay, so let's continue along the line of economic development. Would you support a universal basic income for at least 35% of the residents, the 35% of residents with the lowest incomes or living at 150% of the regional poverty level?
Yes, again, that's a yes question that I can answer. But let me go a little bit further, and I'll try not to go past the 90 seconds this time. As president of the city council, I think my greatest role will be to be the chair of the Board of Estimates. Every Wednesday at the Board of Estimates, tens of millions of dollars are given away to contractors, to vendors, to others, and 90% of the people who get those monies are not Baltimore City residents. They're not Baltimore City business people. They don't pay Baltimore City taxes. And yet there are tens of thousands of people who live in Baltimore without work, without sustainable salaries or wages, who are trying to take care of their children, trying to take care of themselves, and they can't do it. And we, the city of Baltimore, takes taxpayer dollars and give it to people who are driving into Baltimore from some other state. One of my opponents has put in a bill to say, let's bring in more people from outside of the state. and not give the money to local, minority, and women-owned businesses right here in Baltimore City. I think what you asked me, yes, I agree to do that. But I think better if I were able to tip the scales and every Wednesday, instead of giving 90% of city taxpayer money to people from outside of our state, I would give the money, we would give the money to people who are right here in our city first and in our state second. I think it is obvious that too many people in Baltimore don't have enough to sustain their lives. They don't. And we act as if that's something that we can't see. And we wonder why kids are on the street trying to wash your windshield when they are trying to eat. They are trying to have clothing. They are trying to have shelter. They're trying to help their actual family. In Baltimore City, 1/3 of every young person under 18 lives in poverty. 1/3. That means their family is in poverty. And we're complaining, well, there's a
Let me
better
ask you another question that
Okay,
kind of dovetails there around
okay,
gentrification.
I
How would you
will.
expand the footprint of investment into communities that have been historically blocked from opportunity while ensuring that legacy residents aren't displaced or excluded from new amenities and increasing property values?
Right. Again, in Baltimore City, we have intentionally um, not just marginalized people, we have intentionally kept people out of ownership. Um, Ownership of the city, not just of their homes, but in Baltimore, it is intentional to discriminate against black people. Intentional. Everything tells you that. We've written history about it over and over again. And so you know it's true. We know that it's true. And I would see it doesn't take legislation to do this. It takes the will of people to do this. It didn't take Marion Barry to do legislation to say, I'm going to do this for black people in this town. It didn't take Maynard Jackson to pass legislation to say, we're going to do this for black people in this town. It did not take Harold Washington. It didn't take mayors who knew that they had to turn this upside down for the people that they represented. And it's not an issue of I want to do for black versus white. It's doing for everybody fairly. And in this instance, in Baltimore, we have done unfairly for so long for so many folk that we now have a situation that we are about to collapse our entire city because we have done so wrong for so long. There are so many people who can't even take care of their families. And so I'm saying to you, Kalila, that what I need to emphasize is this is a matter of will more than it's a matter of legislation. You need the people who are going to be your leaders who are willing to stand up and say, I'm going past the 90 seconds, but when two large developers asked us for a combined almost $2 billion to build up what was already nicely done, I said, no, we're not going to do that. I want us to give more money to people who are hurting in our town, for people who are in poverty in our town, for affordable housing in this town. You know what happened? I got beat. There were many more council people who said, no, let's give the rich people more money. Screw the poor people. Screw them. And they did. And I don't want to wear this halo. I don't have one. But I was one of the people who stood up time and again and said, hell no. We're not going to give all of the poor people's money to the wealthy people who don't live in Baltimore, who don't pay taxes to Baltimore, who really don't care about the children in Baltimore. I fought it. And from this perch, hopefully, God willing, I'll be able to not only fight it, but I'll be able to stand in the gap in a way that no one has done in quite some time in our city.
So let's push to continue the conversation around housing. And these questions are from Lisa Snowden McCrae.
Okay.
Respondents to the survey also expressed enthusiasm for the idea of supporting nonprofits that provide affordable home ownership. Do you agree that this is important, and do you have a plan for supporting these groups?
Yeah, we should support those nonprofits that, but let me say this. Nonprofits who are, I'm looking for a word, but who are out of the community, organic. There are people who are in the business of profiting off of poverty. That's what they do. They're not bad people. They have lovely 401ks and kids go to private school and they're wonderful people. And I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but it's just like I was talking about earlier, who was doing the real work in the communities. I think people who are part of the community and who know the community are the people who are most often marginalized themselves. They're the ones who are not allowed to teach people about home ownership, to teach people about how to bring their community together, how to organize their community. So I want to see organic nonprofit organizations supporting the community. Because at the end of those days, too often, the poor people are still poor. And the people who gave them advice on how to get out of their situation are out of their situation, while the poor people are still there. I hope that made some sense.
Sure. So let's pivot to the $20 million Affordable Housing Trust Fund. In
Yeah.
2016, Baltimore residents voted to create it, funded partially by revenues from taxes and real estate transactions. Citywide Blueprint participants thought that the money should go to reusing vacant housing for affordable housing. How do you think this money should be spent, and what do you think it should go to?
I think it should go to um, rebuilding many of our vacant houses, and I think that that money should go to men and women who can themselves rebuild these houses, who could get skills and training, and in fact, they can look forward to rebuilding homes that they themselves will then be able to purchase themselves. They will be able to purchase because they will have a down payment of sweat equity as well as being paid for the work that they do. And then because they have learned a skill and they have a skill, and we're going to do a whole bunch of other homes next door to that, they will now have an opportunity to continue to work and be able to pay the mortgage on a home that they themselves built. So I think that the money definitely should go to rebuilding homes in our community, but we don't need to take that bid out to contractors who would come in from another state, another place, and hire people who are not a part of the community to build houses in a community. That's what I think should happen. And by the way, the last thing, I know I keep doing this. Often I think when we talk about affordable housing, it's not so much that we don't have housing stock. What we don't have are people with jobs to afford the house. So people need to get a decent salary. Instead of saying, they're poor people, let's find a way to get poor people poor housing. No, let's find a way to get people decent housing, and let's pay them decently, and let's help them with education and job skills and an opportunity, like giving some of the tens of millions of dollars we give away at the Board of Estimates every Wednesday to local contractors.
Great, thank you. I want to close out by discussing civic participation, and these questions were prepared by Tom Hall.
Okay.
80% of white voters said that they've been involved in informing the budget process. Less than 60% of African Americans, 40% of Latinos. How would you increase engagement in the political process among people of color who've long been marginalized in Baltimore's power centers?
Right. I think you absolutely, I mean, well, that's absolutely true. I think that the political process in Baltimore is dealt differently in white and black communities, and it's obvious if you see the conditions of the communities. You see communities where people feel like they have little political power, and so the streets remained unclean, not because they haven't cleaned them, but because they don't get two and three cleanings per week, and they don't get the same kind of police protection. In too many communities, the police give impunity and immunity. Look, right now, in the wake of what's going on, we find that Pennsylvania and North Avenue, drug dealing goes on with impunity and immunity every day. As a matter of fact, the drug dealers are now wearing gloves and masks. It's unbelievable that even at this point, 5 years later, nothing has changed for that community and for the people who live there and the kids who are trying to go to school, who are trying to just live and play and have recreation. And so the answer to your question is that they've got to have more responsible and responsive elected officials, first of all. So when that happens, something is wrong with the folk who are representing their interests, who are representing their areas. Again, not to have a halo, but oftentimes we made sure when I represented a district that there were community, not just meetings, but that the communities got to know each other, linked to other communities, and that we brought together larger town hall meetings with not just elected officials, but appointed officials and cabinet officials and appointed officials. I didn't mean to be redundant, so that people can talk to these people directly and hold them responsible, which meant that we would have another meeting 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, to say, here's the checklist from the last time we met. Have you done it? People respond, meaning elected and appointed officials respond to that sort of accountability measure that you bring into it. And that increases what you do. And you got to let people know that they don't need to be afraid to hold people accountable.
So just one final question. We talked about the Board of Estimates before and what happens every Wednesday. Do you support the charter amendment that would reduce the size of the Board of Estimates from 5 to 3?
Yes, I actually put that bill in. It's amazing. I'm laughing because I thought of myself. I didn't think of myself then, but now I think of myself as being one of the most progressive council people ever. Because, and now it's a nice term. But when we were progressive, and they were not just me, and we all said that the Board of Estimates should be 3 members because the two appointed officials who weren't elected by anybody should not be making decisions for the taxpayers of our city. And so that's it. I didn't need 90 seconds to say we don't need 5 people to do that.
Well, I want to thank you, Carl. I want to thank Open Society Institute and my partners, Lisa Snowden McCrae from the Real News Network and Tom Hall from WYPR. I want to thank our sponsors and our partners who collaborated to conduct the Baltimore Blueprint Survey. Do you have any final comments you want to share?
Well, vote for Carl, but I do. I think I made my case, and simply want to say that I feel, with maybe not as much humility as I should, that I'm the person who has stood in the gap over and over again for the citizens of this city. I'm the guy who have said, stop. Don't take our taxpayer dollars and give them to the wealthiest person you can find who lives outside the city, who pays no taxes, who hires nobody from the city. Stop doing that. I'm the guy who said, let's audit all the books in Baltimore City. Let's find out where our money is. And I got pushback from, again, people who are now running for this office who said, we don't need to audit the books. we didn't need to audit the books because they were afraid of what they were going to find. So I'm the guy who said audit the books. I'm the guy who says let's make sure we give our money to local residents and entrepreneurs. So that's my whole line, is to stand up for the citizens of this city and to turn this thing around, and particularly education. Education in this city is horrible. You know it's horrible. There are 25 really good schools that work, and there are 180 schools. And it's just a damn shame that our children, first of all, have to walk through the unsafe neighborhoods to get to bad schools that then don't teach them what it should teach them. And then at the end of that, they can't get jobs because they don't have skills. And it's more than unfair. It's an immorality that we perpetrate in this city. So thank you. I thank you, OSI. Thank you, Khalil, and Tom, and Lisa, and everyone else who's not here. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you in this forum today.
Well, thank you, Carl. Take care of yourself. Again, I'm Kalila Harris with Psi Phi Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Stay tuned for the next session.